800 years ago, this valley in North Yorkshire, where we've come for this week's Antiques Roadshow, resounded to Cistercian plain chant as the monks of Fountains Abbey followed their lifetime of prayer and meditation. This is where the monks built their first church and began their lifetime of prayer. Every day they attended 8 services, beginning with vigils at 2 in the morning and ending with Compline at 8 in the evening.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
The parlour took its name from the French verb parler, to speak. It was the only place where the monks of this silent order could come for a conversation. But they could have no idle chit-chat. It had to be a matter of some significance. The life of a monk was certainly not one for a gourmet. In winter, he would only have 1 meal a day consisting of vegetables and bread. He would sit here in silence, listening to readings from scripture, nourishment for his mind and his body. You know, it's said that cleanliness is next to godliness. That wasn't quite true here at Fountains. The monks only bathed 4 times a year, and even that was considered excessive. The last abbot, Marmaduke Bradley, signed the deed of surrender to Henry VIII on this spot in 1539, and so Fountains Abbey and the monastery were dissolved. Well, the grounds of the Abbey provide an ideal location for us, and even our gamble on fine weather seems to have paid off today. So, here at Fountains Abbey, let's now join our experts with the people of North Yorkshire.
I bought it at a garden fete about 1946, 1947.
Did you?
And my wife insists that I paid 4 6 for it, but I'm certain that I paid 7 6 for it.
Do you know anything else about the history of Gallet, or...?
I didn't know anything about it until about 5, 6 years ago while watching your Antiques Roadshow, which my wife were avid watchers of the show. And there was something like this on the show at the time. And my wife said, well, I'm certain to us that, to my mind, that there's something. And she picked it up and she saw the inscription, the motif, galley.
Yes. Yes.
And I thought, well, it must be fairly bad. We had one time an antique coming round the house, antique, and he offered us, I think it was £700 for it, I think, something like that. So I thought, well, it must be fairly valuable. I'm not quite really sure.
Well, it is, but perhaps I can tell you a little bit more about Gallet, because Émile Gallet, at the end of the last century, inherited a firm in Nancy. His father was more of a ceramic maker than a glass maker.
I see.
And Gallet pioneered cameo techniques in glass. The earliest pieces tend to be wheel engraved, so you case the glass in as many colours as you've got here, and the autumnal colours were very much the style of the Art Nouveau period. So having cased the glass up in different layers, you could either then cut through it with a wheel or with hydrofluoric acid. This one has been cut through mainly by hydrofluoric acid.
I see.
So it's an acid-etched cameo vase, and the rim up here has traces of wheel marks, so it may have been finished on a wheel. It probably dates to around just after the First World War period. We're looking at that sort of period rather than the earliest period of Gallet glass. You were offered 700. It's worth slightly more than that. I think if it went to an auction, you'd have to pay between £800 and £1,200 for it. So it's gone up a little bit.
Yes.
But your initial offer of £700 wasn't at all bad.
Yes, I see, yes.
Anyway, thank you very much for bringing it along today.
Well, we're in Yorkshire, and this is typical of one of the more famous of Yorkshire's children, Thomas Chippendale's work.
I don't think it's very old, is it?
What do you mean by not very old?
Well, I don't think it's more than 100 years old, is it?
Absolutely right, but it's still called Chippendale furniture. People always refer to this design as Chippendale, and I don't see any reason why not, because he was the man who made this style famous.
Quite.
But you're quite right about the date. Late Victorian,
Yeah.
possibly Edwardian, 1895, 1900.
Yeah.
What is typical of Chippendale's work is this type of decoration, this Chinese Chippendale decoration here. This rather beautifully moulded astragals, as they're called. Beautifully made here.
Yes, that's what I like.
Leading up here to this Greek key, which is again, you see it in Grecian, Chinese, the melange that Chippendale did in the 1750s when he was designing and working. But no, it's a later piece.
Yes.
But it's not a reproduction,
Oh,
because it would never have been made exactly in this shape or style in the 18th century. The wood is lovely. Do you know what the wood is?
certainly.
Yeah. It's obviously been well cherished. It looks to me like a family piece.
No, it isn't. We bought it at auction in 1965, the country house sale. We couldn't attend the auction,
Right.
so we left a bid for £100. And 2 or 3 days later, we went home. We really forgot about it. I didn't think, any more
Casually
about
leaving
it.
a bid, yes.
I don't think it's nothing. I'm sure we won't get it. And about 3 days later came this letter to say that our bid had been successful, and we got it for £90.
Isn't that lovely? And that was, what, 30 years ago?
Yes, 30 years ago, exactly. Yes.
I think you've done very well indeed. I mean, it's beautiful quality. This is so nice. These silver-plated handles.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are nice details here. If you sort of go down here, you've got this very nice...
You go down now. I'll stay here.
There's a bit of a creak there.
I'll never
That
get
was
up.
me, was it? You've got this very nice, again, Chinese Chippendale gallery here, which is typical of the work that he did.
Yeah.
And he always made things in three-piece ply. And have you seen you've got a break there?
I have a lot of breaks,
Yeah,
but I've
right.
got all the pieces.
You have? We've got to be careful with that, because anyone enthusiastically dusting is going to catch that piece there.
That's how they went, you see. I
And
don't dust it much now.
No, you shouldn't.
No.
That could and ought to be probably glued back, but what is fascinating is that this is two-piece ply, rather than the three-piece that Chippendale himself would use. So it's got two layers
Yes.
of wood,
Yes.
rather than 1, 2, 3, as he would do it, and it's for strength, to keep it much stronger. So you bought it 30 years ago, bravely leaving a bid. Well, I hope you haven't got it insured for £90.
No,
It's not enough.
no.
It's a beautiful cabinet, minimum £5,000.
Oh, my. Well, that's a surprise.
Absolute minimum.
That's a surprise.
A Happy New Year card, dated 1924, but the
Yes.
artist is very, very special.
Jack B. Yeats, of course.
Jack Butler Yeats.
Yes. He used to come down to Devonshire. He found it a very pleasant place for holidays and got to know the family there.
He used to come and stay with your family.
Oh, he was living in the village.
He was living in the
Yes.
village. Yeah.
And he was renowned for his entertaining the children of the village.
Right. Well, this is rather a comic
Yes.
drawing, isn't it?
he's,
It shows he certainly had a sense of humour.
Yes.
And did he do this regularly? Or?
Well, we've had 1 or 2 more. Yes, there must be half a dozen or so like this.
That's
Yes.
wonderful to have
Yes,
that
yes.
sort of intimate contact
Yes, yes.
with an artist as
Yes.
important as Yeats, because Yeats has become probably the leading Irish painter of the century.
Yes.
And his work has started recently, with the increased interest in Irish art, has started fetching really prodigious sums. I mean, I don't want to overexcite you by telling about the high prices that have been paid for oil paintings, but this is obviously a curiosity, but a very charming curiosity. And probably would now fetch something in the region of £2,000 to £3,000.
Really? Yes.
Is that,
Extraordinary, yes.
which is not bad for a New Year's
You'd
card.
be surprised where it's been kept in the last 50 years.
Where's it been kept?
In an old suitcase.
In the
the
suitcase.
loft. In the loft.
Well, I hope it'll come out of the suitcase now and be properly appreciated.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing it.
Thank you.
So that was Beauty, and this is the Beast. You like this?
I hate it. Isn't it hideous?
Why?
It's hideous.
It's hideous.
I didn't buy it. It was, well, my mother-in-law, I suppose.
It's your mother.
I inherited
And
it.
the fact it was your mother-in-law's has nothing to do with your thinking it's hideous.
Nothing to do with it at all.
Right,
I
good.
just
I'm
think
glad
it's-
to hear it.
I think it's hideous.
The thing about the Victorian period is it is so terribly, terribly serious and meretricious and high-minded. And the great thing about these brothers, the Martin brothers, is that they really did debunk all of that, and they brought horror into pottery in a big way.
Really?
And this is a piece possibly by Edwin. The Martin brothers worked as a team, although it was a pretty fiery relationship. And as they, one by one, dropped off their perches, I'm afraid that the production went into decline because they were rather reluctant to pass on their particular secrets of their particular part of the process of the manufacture. The design is actually done by scratching, freehand scratching into the clay whilst it's still wet, and then rubbing various coloured oxides to pick up the outline, and then covering the whole thing in a salt glaze, which is done by throwing salt into the kiln at a critical point in its firing. The salt evaporates throughout the kiln and sticks to anything that's in the kiln. This is probably going to be worth at auction somewhere in the region of 250, 300 pounds.
Oh, why would we give that?
Not even knowing it was your mother-in-law's.
It'll go back in the cupboard where it came from. It's not pretty. Ugly, isn't it?
This must help you to decant a nice bottle of port very well, is it?
No, I've never used it.
You've never used it?
No, not me, no.
Ah.
It came from the prairie, from Viscopa Abs, Mount Grace Prairie.
How long have you had it?
The solicitor gave it to us when he cleared the...
How long ago was that now?
Oh, she's been dead 20-some years now.
Well, I think we've got to add another 200 years to that.
Oh, yes.
I've never seen one before, except perhaps in a museum when I wasn't looking specifically for that kind of thing. But this is an 18th century English funnel.
Funnel. Oh, yes.
And this bit is just like an English wine glass, and you can tell it's old. You see, because all these lines, what are called reeds, and they are caused by the pincers when they draw it out. It's been perhaps a little chipped there, but still, it's a gem. I mean, it's a lovely, genuine, not a big object, not worth a lot of money.
And how much is it worth, did you say?
I should think about a couple of £100.
Oh, yes.
But a collector of things to do with wine might well pay more.
Yes.
Because, I mean, they are exceptionally rare.
Yes.
This is a ship's swivel blunderbuss, or sometimes known as musketoons. I'm never quite certain the difference between them. And it has to be contender for the title of biggest blunderbuss in the world, and you'd expect that sort of thing to come from Yorkshire. So and this would have been carried by a merchantman, and they would have probably had, I should think, a dozen of these, which normally would have been kept in a ready-use rack somewhere, either in the captain's cabin or something like that. The slightest hint of trouble from, say, pirates, they'd have been whipped out. They'd probably kept loaded ready, and to load it, you would have poured a good handful. I don't suppose they bothered measuring it. They've got a powder bag and put a big handful of coarse powder down there. Some wadding, probably oakum out of the deck caulking or something like that. And a blooming great big handful of shot. Everybody thinks that blunderbusses are loaded with broken bottles, stones and things like that, but they used to load them with shot because you get a much better pattern. And shot is a lot ballistically more efficient than bits of scrap iron and things like that. And then you got the rod out of it. You get a good stoking down there, down at the bottom. And everybody always thinks that these great flared muzzles actually cause the shot to spread. Ballistically, they don't. A bored cylinder is the most efficient way of causing shot to spread. And what they're actually put there for is for ease of loading, because you've got a funnel, you can just pour it down there. And also, when you've got it, I mean, really, no one is going to argue with a thing that looks like a trombone, are they? Anyway, they'd have been whipped up out of the racks. At some stage, it would have had a swivel on there, dropped into the gunwales, and when longboats full of whoever it was swimming over the side, bang, and it would have been pretty devastating stuff. And it's really a very rare piece. You don't see ones as large as this very often, and I suspect that they must have been scrapped as soon as they became obsolete. And there's a lot of metal in there, and that would have been well worth melting or busting for scrap, so rarely do you see them. Where did you get it from?
It was bought in a pub for £7.50, about 30 years ago.
So that's a really very interesting piece, and I think that it's worth between £500 to £750.
Oh, yeah.
Simply for its size alone.
Yes.
And what a wonderful piece.
it belonged, I always assumed, to my mother, who probably had it as a child at the turn of the century. I might guess, but I've no idea.
Well, it's actually a little bit later than that. Looking at the mark, it is by Steiff, which is the famous German maker who made all those famous teddy bears. They also made animals and they made dolls. But what I love about this is I haven't had an Eskimo in my hands by Steiff, I think as long as I've been in the business.
Good gracious, yeah.
And I think this might have been made to commemorate Scott's Antarctic expedition.
Right.
The mark, which you usually find on the left ear, is here, which is a little metal disc with Steiff on it. And he is stuffed with what the teddy bears were stuffed with at the time, which is long strips of wood, which then get really shoved in and bent. So it's quite stiff, and yet if you hold it for any length of time by its arm, it becomes like sawdust, and people say, oh, the stuffing's missing.
Right.
But actually it's not, it's just got broken down into sawdust. And then, of course, this furry substance is in fact mohair.
A little bit the worse for wear.
And he's got a bit of a moth mark here.
Yes, right.
But other than that, he's in really good condition, and I think in the right sale, someone collecting all the range who hasn't got this one might pay you as much as 800 to 1,000 for it.
He won't get the chance.
Oh, he won't? You're definitely going to keep him.
Oh, I think so.
Yes, but do keep him out of the light and away from the moths and the bugs.
Right.
No, it fascinates me to be in the wilds of Yorkshire and to find a Russian tea set up here. This is, of course, made, as you probably know, by Gardner of Moscow, an Englishman who went to Moscow to become a potter and produce a very, very fine factory. Moscow, of course, being chosen because it wasn't St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg was the imperial factory, and no one was allowed to work there, so a number of firms set up in Moscow, and including Gardner. And here you've got a complete tea set, have you, of this?
There's a few pieces missing, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did it come to be here in Yorkshire?
Well, my wife's great-grandpa was out in Russia. Apparently, was a merchant adventurer, whatever that means over there. And when he left, when the revolution was on, he brought back as many bits and pieces as he could do, and these are a part of some of the things he brought back with him.
So to get away with a tea set like this is, he must have delicately brought it back over here to Yorkshire. It's an interesting set. Gardner pieces tend to be found in Afghanistan and places like that, very surprisingly. Yeah. They went to India and the Near East, and it's fascinating. It's very much in the style of Limoges porcelain, because there was a big French influence in Moscow, and perhaps that explains this vague connection with French Limoges style, but nice quality. In England, it doesn't fetch a huge amount of money, Gardner's porcelain. Moscow porcelain fetches really very little. One day, I think it will probably boom, but a set like this, what with 6 cups and saucers and you know, the various parts of it, probably only going to fetch something like about £400. Yeah.
Some of our experts collect porcelain, others collect pottery, others still furniture and more pictures. But the private collecting passion of Lars Tharp is actually one object, and that is his cello. Music's a passion of yours, isn't it?
I think it's one of the most important things in my life, certainly, yes.
And this particular cello is a Cremona cello, which makes it special.
It certainly is. Cremona is the home of the violin family, of the making of violins, the best violins in the world. And this is from Cremona, Skegness.
How so?
It was made by a man called George Hudson, who obviously had pretensions to being an Antonio Stradivari. Yeah. And so he called his workshop the Cremona Workshop Skegness.
But he was a fine cello maker of his day.
He was. I mean, there's some exceptionally good instruments made in this country throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, and this luckily passed to me from my grandmother.
And you've had this, therefore, really, and played it since you were a small child?
It was given to me when I was 8. It was really far too big for me to start on, and in fact, when I started playing on it, in the first few weeks, I so hated the noise and I was so upset that my teacher hadn't shown me how to tune the instrument that I actually put my fist through it.
Where?
Just on the top there.
That's a very good repair. Not quite invisible. But...
not altogether invisible, no.
But it still makes that superb sound.
It can make a good sound, Hugh, yes.
You know you're being falsely modest. It makes a very good sound indeed. Can you hear it again?
Mm.
Bravo.
And what's this one that you did?
It's the town hall, Ripon Town Hall.
Oh, that's lovely, isn't it? And he was 11 when he made this as well?
11 as well, yes.
He was a very talented
Very
little
much so.
boy, wasn't he? And do you have them on show?
No, we
yourself
don't
at home?
actually. They're up my grandmother's. But she sort of like passed them down as a family heirloom, where I've got the town hall and my brother has the cathedral. So, but they've had a bit of restoration work on them. They repaired about, what, 2 years ago? About 2 years ago now.
Actually, this one would make a lovely doll's house.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. Well, we used to play with them as kids. Unfortunately, I think we did a bit of the damage there at the front there, you know.
Well, where we're standing now is about 4 miles away from this, which is the other great ecclesiastical landmark of this part of the world, isn't it?
Indeed, surely.
This is Ripon Cathedral.
Yes.
Are you a Ripon man?
Yes, my family have been there for over 100 years.
Right, so this is a very, very familiar view, this.
Very cherished view, yes.
So you must have been very excited to get it when you got it, because...
I didn't dare go and bid for it.
It was in a sale,
It was in a sale, and I had to send my wife. I didn't dare go.
How long ago was this?
About 15 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that.
Well, it's a spectacular example of mid-Victorian landscape. I mean, we've got the wonderful architecture in the background. We've got all the other, probably very accurate, I guess, details. And what is rather nice is the way, in this particular composition, one's got the two little figures here, which give a little bit of sort of narrative interest to it. They draw the eye into the whole composition. When you bought it, had you any idea who it was by?
Well, it was entered in the catalogue as being by George Clarkson Stanfield, who I understood to be the son of Clarkson Stanfield.
That's right, the son of William Clarkson Stanfield. Now, it's not actually signed, but there are many features about it which make one feel confident that it probably is by George Clarkson Stanfield. It's the way the architecture is treated is quite distinctively him. This foliage is quite distinctively him. But what I find absolutely fascinating is this watercolour, which this is also yours.
Well, I'm afraid we bought that as well, and it was...
But in a separate sale?
It was a separate sale. There were 10 items for the sale by Clarkson Stanfield.
So they all, all the watercolours, of which this was one, came from Clarkson Stanfield family.
Yes.
So they had absolute cast iron provenance in that sense.
Well, we think so.
And when you look in at this watercolour, you see it is so clearly exactly the same view as the oil. And I think the existence of this watercolour coming definitely from the artist's collection himself really just about ties up this picture as being by George Clarkson Stanfield. And I think it's a wonderful discovery, particularly being so close at hand here. I think that this picture now at auction would probably be worth between £8,000 and £12,000. Perhaps you should even cover it for a little bit more for insurance, perhaps 13 or 14,000.
Oh, well, she didn't do too badly.
Good, I'm glad to hear it.
Now, you know who this must be? Must be Charles Baldwin. The cover is broken. What a shame, isn't that?
But that's a wonderful exercise.
That's magnificent, isn't it? Whose is this? Is this yours? Isn't it super? How did you acquire it?
It was left to me by a great aunt in her will.
Wish I had a great aunt like that. Oh dear. You like it, do you?
Oh, well, apparently I always liked it as a child.
Did you?
Probably just because the rabbits on it.
Well, that's the best reason for being left something. If you enjoyed it when you were a child, I think it's great that virtue has its rewards.
Absolutely. Date code of 1889. 1889, so it's just over 100 years, and this is the work of Charles Baldwin. Superb painter of animals. Animals and birds was his great speciality. He did all the gilding as well. He would have done the whole caboodle of the decoration.
It's tremendous, all this modelling.
It's fine, a fine pot.
But did he design the pot, or is that somebody else?
Oh, no. James Hadley would have designed the shape, but Baldwin did the painting of it. And a super piece. If that had been perfect, one's looking at about £3,000 to £4,000.
Yeah.
But with the damage like that, you have to, I suppose, half it. I mean, it's repairable, but it will still count as a damaged pot. But I can see that going for £1,000. So look after it, enjoy it, and admire the pot. I think it's wonderful.
In Victoria's time, when the Queen's, unfortunately, she was in mourning for most of her reign, there was only one colour that it was popular to wear, and that was black. So we've got this piece here, which is a very impressive butterfly brooch of good size. The only thing is, it's not jet. It's actually called French jet, which is black glass. It's, in my opinion, probably late Victorian period. And typically you'd have these faceted buttons that were mounted onto a lacquered black metal frame. Now, because it's a butterfly, butterflies are always very commercial, in jewellery particularly. If there's one thing people always like to buy, it's butterflies. So the fact that it's made of a costume substance, which is what this is, it's just black glass and black metal, doesn't detract from the fact that it's an extremely stunning piece. And I would think if you were selling it, it ought to make around about £150. And for insurance purposes, probably around about £250. So black glass, costume jewellery, but an impressive piece which is worth quite a lot of money.
This is a very imposing looking jug. Is it something that's been in your family a long time?
It was handed down from my grandmother to my father, who in turn gave it to me. I'm led to believe, that it was a piece that the silversmith who made it used as his qualifying piece when he qualified for his master silversmith.
Well, the piece was actually made by a very well-known silversmith called George Fox. He was one of the most notable silversmiths of the 19th century. I doubt, however, whether a piece like this would have been made as an apprentice, because this is known as the Cellini ewer, and supposedly modelled after a vase or jug made by Cellini in the 16th century. However, this is very much in the high Victorian taste, and it's hallmarked around the neck, around here.
Right, yeah.
And maker's mark GF is for George Fox, and the date letter here, the P, is for 1870.
I see.
It also has a very good-looking stopper in the top here, modelled as a Roman centurion, and which is cast and very good quality. But notice it's actually made by a different maker, maker's mark FB, and a date letter for 1871, so I imagine that was added just the following year. The quality of this, the weight is really tremendous, isn't it? And look at all the detail in here, the stags,
right,
and the faces, you know, very well executed. And I think if you had to buy something like this from a reputable establishment, you could probably pay £5,000 for a good jug like this. It is very heavy, very good quality, by a good maker.
Better go and see my insurance broker.
Well, it's a very nice piece. It's a serious musical box, and in its day, 1880, made in Geneva with a Swiss movement, it would have been an expensive box for a rich family. And was it in your family all that time?
No, it was a close friend of the family who had it given to them in payment for some work that was done for another family who couldn't pay in money, so they paid with the musical box. But
It's a very
when
nice
the lady
payment.
got very elderly, she knew that I had listened to the box as a small child, so she said that she wanted me to have it, so that I would look after it.
Yes,
And
which
love
you
it,
have.
which I have.
Which you have. It has the British coat of arms, so in fact it was made for the British market.
I thought it probably
And it says 12 heirs, and whereas you'd have fabriqué à Genève with a lot of them, the early ones. This doesn't have that here, but it was made in Geneva. What is particularly lovely is you get musical boxes with 5 bells, but these have got 9, and they've got this lovely coloured butterfly here. Then you've got another gilt metal one here, and then you've got a bee and a dragonfly. It's a lovely, lovely thing to have. Apart from looking at it, also makes a wonderful noise. For insurance, you should be thinking in terms of £4,000. Having said that, it needs a little bit of work done on it. This tooth here needs replacing, and it might cost you £100 or so, and it needs cleaning up a bit, and you might find that 1 or 2 of the pins need replacing, and I think they cost something like £10 to £20 a pin.
Yes.
So it's a highly skilled job.
It would probably be worth having it done then.
I think it would, yes.
William Marshall Braun, signature's down here. 2 boys on the quayside, and it's painted in that wonderful, what is really British Impressionism. It's got that wonderful light in it, a really atmospheric way of painting. That particularly Scottish artist, because William Marshall Braun was an artist from Edinburgh, I believe. How do you get it?
Well, popped into an antique shop, and this was just the canvas, just on the wall.
Yeah.
And the lady there just asked her how much, and it was £2.
£2.
I gave her the £2, and she gave me 6p stamp in change. and my mouth just opened, and we got the painting and walked out, and there with the 6p stamp.
And the painting.
And the painting.
So £1.19 and
35 years ago.
35 years ago. Well, that's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, I think, what are we looking at now? It's worth between £2,000 and £3,000 at auction.
Oh, good heavens.
Why did you bring these in?
Well, I've always liked them, but I really don't know very much about them.
What do you think they might be?
Well, I've been told that they're late 18th century French from the factory at Chantilly.
Right. Well, the first thing is to look at the material itself, and you can see, in fact, reflected on the surface, how the surface is, in fact, rippled, right?
Yeah.
These are Chinese export porcelain, and this is simply them, as it were, responding to demands in Europe for masses of this material. And in fact, soft-paste porcelain is quite difficult to make in this size. That's why they probably sent out these designs to be copied. So that the material here being all this sort of rippled grey look, it's not smooth, it's not glassy. That's one of the traditional failings of Chinese export porcelain, it's got that. And then another thing we look at is also on the base. If you run your finger around the base, you can feel the grit on it. Well, Europeans didn't fire their porcelain on grit or sand like that, so we have that confirms this. Next, we look at the facade, the actual design, and it's, of course, based on the sort of vegetation you get on Lake Chantilly, quite right. But it's very, very stiff. You can see it's outlined almost like a transfer. So this is based on the current fashion for, I suppose, Meissen porcelain of scattered flowers. And then finally, the rim has this, what is called, we call osier pattern. It's simply basket weave, which is extremely fashionable. All the German factories and some of the French factories did this kind of weave pattern. But it's just simply not that. And then finally, when you look at the mark, you can see it's meant to be the hunting horn of Chantilly. But in fact, if you didn't know that was a hunting horn, you wouldn't really know that. So these are rather amusing plates made in Jingdezhen in central China, copying a European idea. This is not unusual, though. They copied all sorts of things. If these were Chantilly, they'd probably be worth a fraction more than the Chinese, I feel. Maybe 800 to 1,000. I suppose the Chinese are probably 600 to 800 for the pair. But they're very interesting from that point of view, that they're in disguise.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, I think they're fascinating.
Huh. Thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing them along.
Pleasure.
I think this is wonderful. It's a simple microscope. Right. It would have been used by one of the amateur microscopists. It's a little Lieberkühn microscope. I would probably date it around the middle part of the 18th century. Yeah. From that point of view, it's actually quite rare. Yeah. It's called a Lieberkühn because of the concave reflector, which was really, I suppose, invented by Lieberkuhn in the early part of the 18th century, 1730s. And it's simply used like this. You literally just hold the piece up to the sky, up to the light, and view the object. And what will happen is that this reflector would reflect the light from the daylight onto the object, which was put onto that point. And you'd adjust it, bring it into focus, and the reflector would then reflect the light onto the subject. Do you remember what you paid for this?
Yes, I paid £2.50 about 20-odd years ago.
If you sold this today, I would imagine that you'd probably be looking to get something in the region of £400 for it.
Oh, that's rather nice.
So £2.50 to £400 is a rather nice profit.
It's a very appreciable appreciating asset.
Yeah, it's quite a rare object.
Yes.
Can you tell me who he is?
Could be anybody from Napoleon to Rabbie Burns.
Rabbie Burns. I think he's Rabbie Burns, except
it's female.
I suspect that the decorator decided to have a joke by converting what is definitely a male figure into Widow Twankey or whatever it may be. But the material is straightforward, early 19th century pearlware, so-called because of the pearly blue of the glaze. And it's been enamelled on top, and the enamel is beginning to flake off.
That was in the dishwasher, I think.
Was
probably.
it? Yes, it does happen in the dishwasher. Do you put all of your pottery figures in the dishwasher?
Well, when they need really washing, they come up very nice, actually.
They do, yes. Well, I can think of other ways of washing your ceramics.
Well, I've never thought of it as being anything special. No one liked it in the family, really, you see. So.
Yes. You are teasing me about the dishwasher, aren't you?
No, really.
Right, okay, well, I'm lost for words. I wouldn't put it in the dishwasher anymore. This is a particularly tricky enamel, and it doesn't like going in the dishwasher. You shouldn't put it in the dishwasher.
Again.
No, please don't. But anyway, apart from that, it's really rather fun. Value, well, before you'd put him in the dishwasher, probably worth in the region of £300 to £400. After the dishwasher, probably 120 to 180 pounds. Expensive. You could buy a dishwasher for that.
Gosh.
One's always going to be suspicious about these little bureaus. Made as a lady's writing desk, very small and highly desirable. And when they're made in walnut like this, one has to be very careful about the date. And what I'm concerned about really is the colour and the quality of the finish on it. What's the history as far as you know?
We bought it from an antique shop about 20 years ago.
And what did he sell it as? What date? What period?
Well, early 18th century.
Right, right. Well, certainly the shape and the look of it is that. What I'm concerned about, though, is the way it has been repolished. And perhaps 20 years ago, it would have been perhaps more acceptable. But now, I don't like the way all this feather banding on here and on the top is very flat. And I wonder if it might have been re-veneered at some stage, possibly using the old veneer and laying it down again and then repolished. That would probably make sense. Do you use it?
No.
No, it's almost too small and precious to use today, isn't it? It's a nice colour inside. I like the lock. And what is terribly pretty is this stepping here. It's really charming like that. And notice the difference in colour. There's not much wrong with that drawer, is there?
No.
Nice oak drawer. Nice dovetails, a little bit crude, as you'd expect at that time. So we're talking 1710, Queen Anne, George I. Very difficult to be 100% accurate about the date. It's not signed, it's not dated.
No.
What a gem of a piece of furniture. It's just a pity about the colour. So 20 years ago.
Yes.
Do you remember how much you paid for it?
Just over £500.
Well, that's about half the value of a reproduction piece today. So if it's £500 then, what have you insured it for now?
Just what we paid for it, really.
You haven't changed insurance in 20 years?
Not really, no.
Well, I think you've got to put at least £5,000 on it. It's a really gem piece of Queen Anne, George I furniture.
Well, you can't help but really like this picture. It's a family painting?
Yes, it's been in the family for over 100 years.
It was left to my great-grandfather by a friend of his, along with £1,000 and the contents of his wine cellar.
Wonderful. I mean, this is the sort of history lesson. In other words, somebody who is being honest to their contemporary period. He's not trying to say anything more than what it is he really? I mean, here we've got this perhaps religious figure, certainly local dignitary, coming in to give them an extremely boring talk about life. And here they are. The teacher's trying to keep them in control. They're doing anything but listening to him. I mean, there's about one girl here, I think, who's
paying attention.
Who's paying attention. The rest of them just behaving as we'd expect children to behave. But John Morgan is a relatively well-known painter of contemporary life.
Yes.
He's not trying to prettify things. He's painting very accessible, beautiful pictures, but he's not trying to tell a story as such. He's just telling it as it is. And that comes from Sir David Wilkie, who died in 1841, who is the Scotsman, who is the father of contemporary painting, if you like, in Britain for the Victorian period. And John Morgan has a son called Frederick Morgan, and Fred Morgan paints contemporary life, but in that what we call very Victorian chocolate box way, simpering stories, and they make a lot of money because of it. But I prefer Daddy, because I think that John Morgan himself is a much better artist. We think of, certainly the heart of Victorian painting as being very hard-edged, very hard lines, sharp colours. And the one thing I like about John Morgan's paint is that he's got a very soft focus. Often he's more colourful. This is rather monotone, even if it were cleaned. It hasn't got a lot of colour in it. But he has this rather wonderful softness about him, which I like very, very much. A picture of this quality, of this sort of subject, is hard to find now, and it's very much sought after. I think a conservative estimate might be 30,000 plus, £30,000 plus. I think a retail estimate would be 70 to 100,000 pounds.
Good heavens.
Because actually, where today do you find a picture like this? It's a fun picture.
It's brought much enjoyment to our family.
Thank you.
Much.
Well, I must say we've had an absolutely marvellous day here at Fountains Abbey. It's been perfect in every sense. We've had good weather, many hundreds of people, and fine things they brought with them too. So our warm thanks to the people of this part of Yorkshire, and I very much hope you'll join us next week at the same time. Until then, from all of us at Fountains Abbey, goodbye.
Stay with us on BBC One. Hamish has a rival for Isabel's affections next.